TV execs were afraid that people would think this show was about opera singers. This story and much more about this TV show, which I think is the greatest of all time, next. Hi, welcome to Retro Flicks. This is your channel for movie and TV retrospectives. I was going to wait to do this TV show later down the line sometime, but I was online the other day and I was reminded when I was online, this was just a day or two ago, that June 19th was the 10th anniversary of the passing of James Gandolfini. And when I saw that, I decided to do the retrospective on The Sopranos today and not wait any longer. I thought this would be a great time to do that. So today we are going to do The Sopranos, which I said in the intro of this. I believe, I know other people are with me on this, I'm certainly in the category of those that believe this is the best television show ever made. The premise of this show was Tony Soprano, who was played by James Gandolfini, and we'll talk about cast a little bit later, is a North New Jersey mobster. Most of the show is set in northern New Jersey, sometimes though in New York City. And basically this is looking at the life of Tony Soprano with his family life, his life as a mobster, and of course then too one of the things about who is he was seeing a psychiatrist. So it kind of intermingles all that, and so it was really groundbreaking that you have this character that, and actually an exec at HBO, the president, who we'll talk about here a little bit later, even mentioned that Tony Soprano is like everybody. He has the same issues, he has the same problems that everybody has. The only difference is he's a don in a crime family. Other than that, you watch the show and you see him going through the things that everybody goes through. So that's another thing that makes the show just phenomenal. But we'll talk more about that later. But that's a little bit of the synopsis of the show. The conception of the show started with David Chase. David Chase was a writer, producer in Hollywood. He had a few things, but never really he did TV, could never really go into the film, crack into that, which he wanted to do. So he had written this. Basically this pilot about this mobster and the mobster's relationship with his mother. And so this is really where this started. And this originally started as a TV script. As I said, Chase wanted to break in the TV. He was going to write this as a TV movie. And he talked to his agent, and his agent persuaded him that he should make this a TV series. Chase had a lot of the characters that were in this TV show based on people that he knew growing up in North New Jersey, where he's from. And also, too, the relationship between Tony and his mother, Olivia, in the show is really a lot based on Chase and the relationship he had with his own mother. Chase pitched this show to several networks, one of which was Fox. Fox decided to pass on it. One of the networks, though, that was really interested in it and ended up becoming just a phenomenal marriage between the two was HBO. And this is really thanks to Chris Albrecht, and this is who I was referring to that said about Tony Soprano having a lot of the problems that everybody else has. Just a few minutes ago I mentioned that. That was Chris Albrecht that said that. And Chris Albrecht was a big champion of this show. So they had Chase make a pilot. Chase made a pilot, and they brought it back, tabled it for a little bit, but they decided, yes, this is gonna be pretty good. Let's order some more episodes of it and go from there. And HBO did just that. They ordered then 12 episodes to be tacked on with that pilot episode, and the series started on January 10th of 1999. Execs, though, were kind of a little bit afraid of the title, The Sopranos, because they thought that people would see that and think it was a show about opera singers, the soprano being the highest voice the highest voice range being a soprano. And so they thought, well, we hear the Sopranos, people are going to say, hey, this is a show about opera singers. So what they ended up doing was they ended up showing, because obviously it's a mob, they ended up showing a gun, and it was with the R in Sopranos. So they would have the Sopranos, and then the R was actually a gun. So somebody would get that and say, okay, well, that's not about opera singers. What was interesting about the casting was a lot of actors in this show were from that New Jersey area, New York, New Jersey area, and they were playing characters a lot like themselves. Eventually, and they were relatively unknown, but they were playing characters a lot like themselves, which lent a lot of authenticity to those characters. Eventually, more established actors, as the show went on and got the popularity, would then come in and do like guest shots, or maybe become a part of have a recurring role for a certain amount of time. But the casting was just phenomenal. One tidbit here was the 27 actors that have played in The Sopranos over those years were actually in one movie, and that movie was the 1990 mob movie Goodfellas. So 27 actors that were in Goodfellas played in Sopranos at some point. I'm just going to look at a few of the main characters that started on the show. I'm not going to go them all. There's so many of them that we could be here for hours or do like 10 parts. And we could do that just the show in general. There's just so much to the show. But I'm just going to go through a few main characters. Of course, Tony Soprano, who is the main character on here that we had talked about previously. He was played by James Gandolfini. And James Gandolfini actually wasn't the first person that Chase wanted for that character. He actually wanted Steven Van Zandt, who was the guitarist for the Bruce Springsteen E Street Band. Chase saw Steven Van Zandt one night in an award show, and Steven Van Zandt was talking, and Chase was like, that guy is so charismatic. I love the way he talks and just the way he carries himself and the way he looks. That guy is Tony Soprano. And so he wanted to get Steven Van Zandt in there, but the executives wouldn't let him do that because they said for a main character, we want somebody with acting experience, which Steven Van Zandt didn't. And if you watch that show and see him playing in that show, though, it's amazing he didn't have any because he was just wonderful. But yeah, so James Gandolfini ended up getting that role. A casting director saw him in the movie True Romance and his performance in that, and thought he'd be very good, and of course he was, and he ended up getting the role. Now, Chase did get Steven Van Zandt though in the show, as I just mentioned there a few seconds ago. So since Steven Van Zandt couldn't be Tony Soprano, David Chase actually wrote a role for Steven Van Zandt, which would be then Silvio Dante, and Silvio Dante was basically Tony Soprano's right-hand man. So that was a way that Chase could get Steven Van Zandt into the show. Christopher Moltisanti, which in a roundabout, they weren't really blood, but they were, Tony Soprano would always call Christopher his nephew, which they weren't nephew. It wasn't nephew by blood, but it's just kind of a roundabout way that they were related, but they really weren't a blood nephew or anything like that. That was Michael Imperioli. Michael Imperioli was one of the ones that was in Goodfellas. As a matter of fact, David Chase liked his performance in Goodfellas and wanted him for this role. Michael Imperioli said one time that when he went and auditioned for the role, David Chase was just so poker-faced and would keep giving him notes to how to do the scenes a little bit better. And typically, when that happens, it's not going well. The audition's not going well if they have to do that to you. So Michael Imperioli said he left that audition thinking, I'm not getting that. He was just not into me. I blew that one, But he ended up getting the role, not realizing that's the way David Chase was, and David Chase, wanted him because that performance in Goodfellas anyway. So Michael Imperioli got that role of Christopher. Then there's, of course, Tony's wife, which was Carmella Soprano, and that was going to be played by Edie Falco. And they just had tremendous, Edie Falco and James Gandolfini just had tremendous chemistry with one another. They originally wanted Lorraine Bracco to do that. but they decided to give her another role in it, which we'll talk about next. And then Edie Falco played James Gandolfini's wife because the chemistry with them was just phenomenal. It ended up being obviously a great choice. Although Lorraine Bracco is awesome too, and she was great in the role that she did, which was Dr. Melfi. And Dr. Melfi then would be Tony Soprano's psychiatrist. And Dr. Melfi is actually based on an actual psychotherapist that David Chase had years ago. What also makes this show just very unique is its music. It had a very eclectic selection of music throughout the episodes of the series. David Chase himself selected most of these songs. Now, he did have help from the producer, video editor, and he asked the opinion of Steven Van Zandt himself with his musical acumen. The most famous, though, song of that show may be the opening theme in the opening sequence of every episode, which is a song called Woke Up This Morning by Alabama 3. Initially, they wanted to have a different song for the beginning of the show, but they liked that one so much they thought that really captured Tony Soprano in the show, so they decided to make that something that make that the opening theme that you would see in every episode. And then at the end of every episode would be a different song that they would leave the show on. Their two soundtracks came out of this series as well. The Sopranos music from the HBO original series was released in 1999, and it went to 54 in the Billboard 200. And then 2 years later, in 2001, The Sopranos Peppers and Eggs music from the HBO series was released, and it went to 38 on the US Billboard 200. The Sopranos has been hailed by many in the TV and entertainment industry as the greatest and most groundbreaking television show of all time. In 2016 and 2022, Rolling Stone magazine had it ranked #1 of all time, #1 TV show of all time. Writers Guild of America and TV Guide would follow suit. Maureen Ryan of Pop Matters in 2007 said this about the series, and I quote, "No one-hour drama series has had a bigger impact on how stories are told on the small screen," end of quote. Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan in 2013 said shortly after Gandolfini's death, quote, "Without Tony Soprano, there would be no Walter White," end of quote. Couldn't agree more with any of that. If you haven't seen The Sopranos, here's where you can watch it. If you have a subscription, HBO Max and Spectrum. And you can buy at Prime Video, Vudu, and Apple TV. If you've never seen this, I would suggest seeing this. There's obviously a lot of adult situations. This was HBO, so being a premium cable channel, which worked out, I think, for this show, there was no holds barred with that sort of thing. So just a word of warning with that. And if you have seen this, comment below. Tell me what you think of it. What would maybe some of your favorite episodes? What are your memories of it? I remember back in 2001, I bought my first house, and I didn't have furniture yet, but I got cable television, HBO, made sure that was the first thing to give me something to do while I was just settling in. This was summertime, and so they were rerunning the previous season. I had never heard of this show, and never heard of it. And so I just was watching it, and it hooked me, and I watched it. I watch it until this day. So I have an HBO Max subscription. I watch it to this day. I do feel as though this is the best television show of all time. And my favorite episode myself is Pine Barrens, when Polly and Christopher get lost in the woods. So if you want to check that one out, I think that was season 4, I believe. If you want to check that one out, that's my personal favorite. So, but whatever yours is, please comment below. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. Again, this is only, this is going to be an adult show, no doubt about that. So, but if you haven't seen it, go watch it. Comment below. Tell us what you think of it. But I thought, this was the time to do a retrospective of this show. So I hope you enjoyed a quick look back on The Sopranos. And until next time, that's a wrap.